Tess Laurie, a medical doctor and researcher. Last year, I mentioned on my Substack media that I intended to explore some of the challenging questions and theories, so-called big theories of everything. There's a plethora of new literature and many philosophical podcasts in this field, and I'm finding it most interesting. Most recently, I had a conversation with Enna Raytart. She's an author and philosopher, and she spoke about the human path. Today, I'm speaking with Howdie Mickoski. To quote from Howdie's book, "What if you woke up one morning, say this morning, with the crazy notion that everything you had ever been told was a lie? Everything you were taught in school, from your parents, from religion, and from TV was a form of deception. That all the systems you trusted, that you believed were created for your best interests, were false. A calculated series of lies designed as a type of control mechanism to keep you and everyone under the spell of wizards who control this realm. What if you found that even all the areas that seemed designed to assist you, such as religion, spirituality, or self-help, were all part of the deception as well?" This is the opening paragraph of Howdie Mickoski's book entitled Exit the Cave, Ending the Reincarnation Trap. So I've invited Howdie to join me in conversation today to learn more about his theory of our reality. Hello, Howdie.
It's good to see you again. We were supposed to, of course, do this in person a few months ago. I was supposed to be in England and we were supposed to not do it this way, but that kind of didn't work out, unfortunately. So we have to do it through this medium.
Yes, well, it was lovely to meet you in person at the Better Way conference, but although that was brief, wasn't it? And there was so much going on, so we didn't really have a chance to explore much. And it's really, your book really has left quite a lot of reflection, in my mind, and it stayed with me. I read it last year, and I wrote a Substack article about it. I mean, frankly, it's quite a scary book in a way, because your theory of everything is not exactly rosy. So, really quite challenging. I wondered, and I don't really know much about your background, so I thought maybe you could just share with us your background and how you came to explore these really esoteric subjects.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived a very odd life, that's for sure. This creature's been, you know, I started mostly I guess as a hockey player. That's really what I did for most of my high school life. I was an athlete for most of that time. Developed myself a very popular type personality, mostly because I was mostly an introvert and I had trouble dealing with anybody, and so I had to sort of create a mask, a persona. Eventually, I became a stand-up comedian for 15 years through that mask, which anyone who knows me now would think is they can't see how that could be, but it was a built persona to deal with reality. But it was generally pretty good until around 1991. I had a psychopathic father, and so that's already creating pressure in your life when you have someone like that in your close environment. And in 1991, he stole all of my money that I had left stored up for university. So I wound up with this really mess that it took me about 3 years to actually find a way to navigate and get my university degree and finish that off. Just as that was ending, I had an ex-girlfriend get murdered. And so these two events, really close to one another, kind of began pushing me in a direction of deep thinking, which the deep thinking at the time was coming from coming from this murder victim. Was she was living her life perfectly. She was living the exact script you were supposed to live in order to be a successful person in this world. And now she's 24 and she's dead. And so I started realizing, well, the script has to be wrong. Whatever they're telling us of how we're supposed to live can't be right, or she would be doing fine. So it pushed me into some really dark areas. And I was never, in one sense, wasn't working with anybody. Maybe I should have at the time, but it was all internal. I internalized everything and was really questioning. And that actually is a true spiritual path. People think it's about how nice you can sit and meditate and how many yoga postures you can get into. And it's about turning your attention inward and asking yourself really, really difficult questions. So I was doing that for about 3 or 4 years, but nothing was really coming out of it. And I got to the point where I was so depressed, so unhappy, I wanted to kill myself. I just couldn't come up with a really good way that wouldn't be messy for the person who would find me. But I was in this extreme depressed state. My life had kind of just bottomed out, and I was becoming manipulative and I just didn't like who I was, actually. I didn't like who I was becoming through all of these, and and they are traumas. They were traumatic experiences for me, but people certainly who are watching this now have gone through far more traumatic experiences and far more painful experiences than I had, but they were enough to get me pushing to these really dark places. And then finally, on my birthday ish, 1997, a documentary was on Egyptian pyramid building, and it was like equivalent of like a lightning bolt. There was just a tremendous blast of electricity. I'm in the midst of depression at this time, so this was a blast of electricity of like, that's what I'm supposed to do. Ancient Egypt has a secret, and I'm supposed to go find it. And it just energized my entire life. And I spent 5 or 6 years digging into the ancient world, which is how I started first. But in that context, I started to realize that I have to change how I think and I have to change how I am if I'm ever going to understand what the ancient world might have been. And I got very lucky. I met a Korean monk very early on, so I spent a year with him. I wound up meeting several Native Indian medicine men and spent 2 or 3 years with them on the reserves in their sweat lodges and learning from them and massive experiences from them. Several others from Mexico and South America, and it pushed me into 8 years of intense practice. Like I was obsessive practice. I was probably practicing 16 hours a day of something. So I slept maybe only 4 hours a day. I did 4 hours of what I had to do in my comedy world. And then the rest of it was just internal and external practice. The number one being testing reality. I was testing reality to see if it's real. Would it pass the reality test? And it didn't. Every single time I tested it, it didn't. And that's another series of stories of how difficult that period became.
I'd be interested to
Um,
know how you test reality. Given an example of how one would test reality.
there's a lot of ways. One of them was through gazing. I mean, again, I'm doing like 6 or 7 practices a day. One of which was gazing, which was staring at objects. You begin by staring at just plants first, simple things. Then you move to trees. Then you start moving to small moving insects. Then you can start moving to the really difficult stuff, which is eventually clouds and water, which are actually the two dangerous things. And if someone's gazing, don't gaze at that for many years, actually, because of what can happen when you do it. You start very, very slow, but the process was beginning to show just from the gazing practice or a lot of these other activities that reality was not stable. Reality was not. It was transparent. It was, and it got to the point where I tell this story a lot. It got to the point where I was sitting with a girlfriend at the time, and we were watching TV, and the TV was facing the wall towards where the parking lot is. And I said, "Oh, your sister's coming over." So what do you mean? Well, she's parking her car. She's coming up. Then all of a sudden the door knocks and comes in, and girlfriend comes over after and says, how did you know my sister was coming over? Well, I saw her park her car and she's right there. And then she walked up saying, Howdy, that's a wall. How are you seeing the parking lot? And that's when I finally realized the wall didn't exist in my world. I was literally just seeing directly outside. There was no wall there. And this was kind of my life for a while. I mean, I actually had to hold on to chairs when I sat down because I wasn't sure the chair would be there when I sat down. And so while valuable, this kind of
Were you taking any herbal medicines, plant medicines, or whatever? These hallucinogenic sort of, or what do they call
Oh
them?
no, I was 100% completely away from all drugs of whatsoever. That was absolutely number one in my from the day one I started this practice. And I was really thankful that the earliest teachers I had all were very clear. If you're going to learn how to deal with alternate realities, you need to learn how to deal with them in a very clear space. You need to, because the drug a drug induced experience can be very dangerous because the drug's in control. One, the drug controls the experience, not you. So you are on its trip, you might say. The other dangerous thing about them is And someone who's had any kind of addiction as well will know that any kind of addictive substance gives you something that you need at the time, but it demands something back from you. The problem becomes it's usually demanding more than you're getting, hence the disparity from the addiction. And anybody who's been in one knows what they've had to give up to keep their addiction going all the time. So you don't want to get in, at least I was told very early on, you don't want to be involved in any of those situations, particularly when you're testing reality like I was testing.
I'm
And
just trying to,
yeah, I was taught it. I was taught in the sweat lodges, and I was taught by the monk and other people how to do these, how to work with testing and working with alternate realities in the same stable consciousness, starting and ending without anything influencing it.
I know you've had a near-death experience as well. Could that have influenced your perception and training? Because I think most people, I certainly find it hard to imagine, seeing through a wall, or, that kind of alteration in perceptual reality. Do you think a near-death
Well, I
experience?
mean, again, these first 8 years were based on just really hard, intense practice, and and I mean, and as well of reading. I mean, I read everything. It didn't matter whether it was ancient Egyptian texts, whether it was alchemy, whether it was Hermeticism, whether it was Eastern texts, whether it was Gnostic texts, whether it was anything, whatever text I thought had wisdom in it, I was reading. But yeah, I got to the point. So this took place till about 2004. I wrote my first book on ancient Egypt, and I thought I knew something. I thought I was pretty smart at this point. Then I had the death experience in 2005. So the death experience comes afterwards. So I had the death experience in 2005, and in the death experience, I had the understanding that I had been flawed in my seeing. The flaw in my seeing was I had seen that I'd come to see that reality was false in some terms. It was not real. It was transparent. It was not solid. But I was still real. Within the midst of the death experience, I realized, yeah, I'm just as fake as reality. The thing I've been looking at in the mirror all the time is also unreal and fake. It's just a character. It's a character in a movie, right? Character in a TV show. And that was that revolutionized to show me how little I actually still knew. And it took me on another 10-year workload. But that next 10 years coming out of the death experience, while it sometimes was extreme clarity, at other times it pushed me into very difficult, confusing, and again, I can talk to some why that did, why this, because I didn't deal with it properly. I dealt with it improperly, and it pushed me into. I had illnesses for about 10 or 12 years, like just continuous. I probably saw 50 different people give me 50 different diagnoses, 50 different ways of treating it, and never got better. And then one or two small changes in my life, and it just went away on its own. So it was all part of this long process of unraveling the false, unraveling my false self, unraveling my false belief structure on reality. Even though I thought it was false, I still believed it had a certain functionality, or it behaved in a certain way, which is the way we're all taught from a very young child. And it's been years since I've broken that down. Then in 2019, I'll just finish this up and then you can take the
Yes.
conversation where you want. Then in 2019, I came out with actually two books came out that year. One was Falling for Truth, which was all about my death experience and sort of all of the work I had done, all the practice I had done through the years to get to that point. I also came out that year with the book Exposing the Expositions on the World Fairs, which kind of was my stepping stone into this stuff. Everybody wanted to talk to me about the World Fairs and the sort of the lies of the history of the 1800s. Then as I got close to 2022 and I kind of got a bit of a following, they really liked at that time my exit the cave material, exiting Plato's cave, exiting the matrix, dealing with what you might call spiritual warfare in this reality. And so I started putting that book together, and that became Exit the Cave, which became completely different than the book I thought when I was going to start writing it. It sort of wrote itself. I wrote a hockey history book last year, which I thought was going to be a nice little break for me. And it turned out again to be a giant delve into lies of the 1800s. And here I am sort of starting to the work on Exit the Cave too. So there's the kind of overview, and you can take this wherever you want to go.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, well, now that you've mentioned the expositions and the 1800s, and I know you have that's about other resets, isn't it? Or a fake history. So I'm quite interested to start there, actually,
Sure.
because we're in the process of what's called a great reset of the megalomaniac minority special interest groups are to be paid any attention to at all. But your work suggests that there have been many other resets. So could you elaborate on what you think happened in the 1800s?
Sure. I mean, I wrote that book in 2019, and as I was writing it, of course, I had just might say I destroyed archaeology. So I destroyed ancient history with my first book. I realized that everything we've been told there was a lie, but I still, and coming out of university with a history degree, I still kind of believe that relative history in the last 200 to 300 years is somewhat like they told us. I mean, yes, of course, history is written by the victors, and oh, they spin it their own way, but it's still relatively true. When I started studying the world fairs in the 1800s and realized that whole story is a gigantic lie, and in fact, the whole story of the entire century is a complete lie. I wrote in that book, I used the word reset. I used the word that that what these fairs were, for those who don't know, they were giant, massive, supposedly massive built um, small cities, you might as well call them, 700 to 1,000 acres all over the world that they would build in record time with no machines, no equipment, no nothing. Uh, Beautiful, perfect Greco-Roman architecture. They'd have the fair for 6 months and then they'd bring in dynamite and blow them all up. It was the most insane thing I'd ever come across. And then once you examine what's going on at the fairs, it became clear that what they were doing is they're re-indoctrinating a population. They're actually at these fairs before you had movies, before you had television, before you had that this became like the propaganda tool of this is what we expect all of you to believe. And I started began to realize that actually probably most of the human population was wiped out. And literally this was like yeah, it was a reset, it was a restart of the world. And I began to see there was many of these in the past. Then all of a sudden in 2020, when we have our first round of the stupidity, that word reset just gets getting blown on our TV screens constantly, and I'm like, holy crap, we're in another one. It's actually happening right now, it's going through it again. So I began to realize that understanding these other ones is more and more important. Now as I got deeper and deeper into it and began to see now this reality is a simulation, as a not only is it not real, it's an actually built experience or a built experiment for something else. Then the resets begin to make sense. And now I realize, yes, there's been many of them in the past, and it all has to do with energy. And we can again talk about exactly what's going on, but it's important that it's happening now. I'm pretty clear that the simulation we are in now is ending very, very soon. And the ones that we can call them in Gnostic terms, archonic beings, you can call them controllers, archons, demons, you can call them whatever you want. The things that control this entire matrix are setting up a new simulation. And there's going to be a movement of soul essence between one and the other. That's what's
Okay.
going on now. This is being destroyed and the new one's being built. And
So
it's
Howdy, my
going to be
audience is probably might even be quite lost at this point. They'll be saying, "What are archons and what are you talking about?" Because we're all freshly sort of fresh initiates in what
okay.
might be going on in resets and the whole sort of idea that things might be a
Right.
simulation or false reality. So could you explain what are archons and this theory that you have on
Sure.
them controlling things?
Yeah, I fully understand that always this is very difficult material to go with. It's very difficult material to present. Of course, is why I like putting it in a book because you had time to craft it and put it a certain way. I also like to always tell people these are all personal theories. These are all my viewpoints after 30 years of working with this material. You shouldn't believe anything that I say openly, but nor should you reject it because it's so different. Because what I have to say can sound on the surface very, very negative to people and very, very, like you called it, very, very um, difficult to bring in. But actually, I think it's quite positive when you're ripping apart all of the false you've ever been under. What you eventually find is the ultimate truth. You eventually find ultimate freedom and ultimate totality. But you have to go through some very difficult places if you're ever going to reach it. And I'm just helping to give people ideas and things to think about, things to question on their own, on your own journey into finding hopefully ultimate truth. So where this theory now takes me, or how I come to view things are, is I can put it simply as that when we are children, we are taught some basic ideas. That being, we live in a wonderful world made by a loving creator who cares about us, who has built this place so that we can have a chance to experience and learn and grow, that it's a type of school, and we get some difficult challenges, but we'll come through all of those and eventually perfect ourselves, and we can go back and join this loving God in this ever wonderful happiness forever. That's how we're presented one way or another. I've now come to see this place as actually a simulated realm built by an evil deity that the Gnostics called Yabadoeth, or the Cathars called Rex Mundi, who built this as a trap of what we would call divine sparks. I'll get to what that is in a moment. Who built this in order to bring in these certain true spiritual beings into this simulated reality and use them for energy, use them as batteries to power the simulation in itself, the simulation which is a suffering pit of hell. This particular place is here only to mine energy from. Here's the thing. So, and this is not my theory per se. This is how not the Gnostics, the ones who were living 2,000 years ago and who were really the creators of what we now know as the New Testament. The New Testament is chosen material from these Gnostic Gospels that they reshaped and restructured and put, and the Church of Rome put into its own viewpoint. And in the original text, it indicates that there was originally that there is this, they called it a father. They had no other name, but it was a father that was also, it was a masculine feminine perfect combination. And this masculine feminine combination was in a sense emanating out of itself. It wasn't creating things. It was creating more awareness. But out of the awareness there was an error, and from that error is this thing that became known as the word normally used as demiurge, but that's not the right name for it. Decided to create on its own and created this realm that maybe wasn't evil at the beginning, but over time has become simply evil. But he couldn't give it life. The original creator of this matrix could not give it. They could create objects, but the objects had no life. They didn't move. They had no motion. So he had to go back, and depending on the story, depending on the myth, either ask the father for help, and the father sends some help, or he tricks certain what are known in Gnostic terms as divine sparks, which would be us, to come in here in order to make life happen. The problem is, once the divine sparks came in to create the life, you can say that this creator shut the door and didn't allow the divine sparks to leave. And it's ingenious what happened. So the way to look at this is when I talk about the matrix, or we talk about Plato's cave, it's not just the material realm. It's the material, it's the etheric, it's the astral, it's the super duper, it's the nirvana, it's the void, it's anything you can think of where possible experience can exist. That is the matrix. It's massive, it's giant. And there's likely multiple matrices, multiple realities, parallel realities. It's vast. And it's a type of AI simulation. That's the best way of looking at this. The whole thing from its inception is AI. And what this AI originally did was create helpers to build the AI system. Those were called Archons to the Gnostics, which became known as demonic beings and eventually known as angels in other terminology. They're all the same thing. They're all those who work for this creator in order to build a closed system which is designed to only do one thing, keep the energy flow happening. So if you figure this thing is so vast, the kind of power, if that's a computer, the kind of power that would need to keep this whole universe running is vast. So what they did is they decided to make the video game characters in the game the power source for the computer, you might say. So the characters, us, are the ones who are powering the game. It's ingenious but sick. So the whole system is set up simply to mine energy to keep the system running And of course, make sure that no one leaves the system, because everyone that leaves the system means there's one less power source in the game. That's the simple overview of how I've come to see what we are actually in.
Hmm. Wow. So, so if you say it's all a computer simulation and AI,
Mm.
does that then mean that that everything's based on binary code? And I remember Stephen Hawking saying that the world's a hologram. Is how does it does that sort of fit together somehow with your theory?
Sure. That, of course, that's the supposed initial fall in the Bible, right? Which is eating from the tree of good and evil, which is eating from the tree of duality, eating from binary. So everything in reality in the matrix is dual. That's how it's built. It's all built on the ones and zeros, just like a computer code. There's no difference. Yin and yang is a computer code. And of course, you can theoretically, and some have done it over history, in a sense, you might say hack the code. So you can figure out how the code operates. That's really what things like astrology, working with divination tools, various psychic abilities. It's ways of hacking into the system to kind of see if you just change a bit of the code, you'll change the result. Or if you see how the code is being structured, well, you know it's going to happen tomorrow. So in a sense, that's what's really going on. It's that everything is set up under mathematical and geometrical principles. And if you understand the mathematics and geometrical principles here, it's not sacred or special. It's just part of the prison, just part of the cave structure. And but it can tell you, like, what day is the warden coming to visit? What day are they going to do the change in the prison? What day do we get our outside exercise time? It's telling you what's going to happen in the prison so you can prepare for it, which in one sense is good, but in another sense, it's also not getting anyone out of the prison. And that's where the trap now of spirituality begins, religion on top of it, which on one level, all of these things began with somebody who really knew something. Like if you look at the core of all this stuff, there's something really deep in all of it, but it gets covered over very, very quickly and changed over many, many years to become a system of how to make my prison cell nicer, how to enjoy my time in prison rather than actually saying, I'm in a prison. How do I get out? It's interesting because the philosophers of the 1800s, like we take a guy like Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer was very clear when he wrote that the world is a prison, and he wrote brilliantly, wonderful texts on it. But he took a path almost like Buddhism, where he said, well, if the world's a prison and the world is suffering, then what we need to do is find ways to reduce suffering. Stop chasing happiness. Let's reduce suffering. And actually, that's the best tool for going about this world. It's how actually I live my life now. It's like, how can I reduce suffering for myself, for others, for animals, for nature, for anything I find? Is there a way to is there a way from what I've done today to reduce the suffering of something or someone? And that's a great way to live, but you're still in the prison, right? Schopenhauer was never writing how to exit the prison, how to exit the matrix, how to leave it. He was just talking about how to exist more easily within it. And I guess what I've been coming with what I'm saying, and I guess why a number of people have started to gravitate around me in a bit of a community, is that right? All that matters is this place is a suffering pit of hell. And I was tricked into coming in here. I'm not interested in being a part of this ever again. And I'm going to make sure I do everything I can within this life to be sure that this is it. It will never happen again. And I'm going home. That's, and there's a number of people now who are seeing through this, and that's their only goal is return home, return to where we came from, return to
May I ask a
the true
question,
original
Howdy?
source. Of
Um,
course.
if you know, is it possible that in actual fact the simulation could be a positive simulation, or used to be a positive simulation, and it got corrupted, for example, say with a computer virus, so whatever this demiurge or whatever it is that then came out. So it was something that was functioning well in a beneficial way, and then it got corrupted. Maybe we came and went at our own at leisure, but it got corrupted. And if it is something that's been corrupted, um, is there a time point? I mean, our history, we're sort of told 2,000 years worth of history, and anything that happened thousands of years ago is pretty much ignored. But is there a point in history that you could point to and say, well, things, that is a point where humanity was attacked or something and things changed?
Um, so first question, was this ever positive? No. It was from the immediate beginning a deception and a lie. So, like anything, as soon as you're dealing with deception and lies, that's obviously what we would classify as evil. So it's been evil from the start. Now, it hasn't been different. It's been getting worse. Every single reset or every single restart makes it one level worse. So if you go back 4 or 5 resets, it would have been a little more pleasant. Certainly, if we look more, one of the things I look in when I look into and studied the ancient world, or even studied ancient cultures, how ancient tribal civilizations lived. If I go study the Cheyenne or the Arapaho or the Aboriginals or the early peoples of Europe, they lived in a much more harmonious way, in a much more interactive way with nature. And I think it was easier to do in a previous period because that's how it was set up. But now we get to the energy problem. So again, the whole thing is set up, and this is Robert Monroe. Robert Monroe was very interesting. He wrote a number of books on his out-of-body experiences. And he wrote one chapter in his book called Far Journeys, chapter 12, all about having an experience of meeting basically demonic beings and them showing them the history of the earth, showing him that everything in this realm has been built for what was called in the book loosh, which was a word that means energy extraction, the energy that's being extracted from the creatures within this thing. And these demonic beings are constantly changing the simulation when they realize that they're not getting enough energy. So at one period of time, the and I'm going by just Robert's book, and I think it's very valuable, is that there was a different structure here, and it was better, and theoretically can be technically on some levels better. But these archonic beings, as it's growing, the simulation is constantly growing. It's not shrinking. It's always getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it grows, it needs more power, which means whatever they've been getting from the system, they need more of. Now, they can't bring in any more divine sparks. They've only got what they've got. Many divine sparks are leaving over time. The last reset, I'm sure a number of divine sparks left. I missed that one. For some reason, I wasn't alert enough to get out the last time. But so they real within the book, it's suggested that once they found out that conflict, pain, and suffering give them more energy, they started building the simulation to create more pain and suffering and anguish, particularly from another creature having to catch and eat another creature. I mean, this is one of the first things that tells us that our entire reality is insane, that everything has to eat something else constantly just to survive. I mean, how many worms have just died in the last minute to feed all the birds? How many mice have just died in the last 5 minutes to feed all? And you know, does a worm scream when it gets eaten? Any loving creator could have come up with a different system. You wouldn't have to come up with a system that automatically creates pain and torture just for another creature to survive. So it tells right away it's built into the system, but it seems like every generation it gets one level worse because they need more energy. And they're always finding a way to churn up the energy structures. Now, that doesn't mean the positive things that we go through are not also generating energy, that they're also eating. And that's where it gets confusing because some people take this idea and they say, oh, yes, it's fear, and they're just creating fear and they're creating pain. And so if we just get rid of our fear and we get rid of that and we just be loving and happy, then it'll all be fine. Well, no, actually, again, it's a dual world, and it doesn't matter which side of the dual you fall on, you are going to fall into the trap. And so you take all this down to the material realm, because everything as above, so below in Hermetic terminology. So the system, so when we look at the systems here, they're just smaller versions of the bigger system. So of course, the system doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. As long as you've chosen one of the sides, they win, right? It doesn't care whether you choose A or B. Every choice that tends to be given within that, even at this level of the simulation, is basically just a choice between cancer and leukemia. That's really all you're choosing. You're not really making a true choice where there's the possibility of freedom and totality. You're just choosing, in which way am I going to let the Archons eat me this time? And now it's taken years, but now I can understand what Mr. Park was talking about. Now I can understand what some of the native medicine people were talking about, that there actually is a way. There's a way of turning your attention away from the external reality simulation to that which is true, which is within, to the one thing within us that is actually total, complete, has more power. Actually, each one of us has more power than the simulation. The entire simulation actually has no power greater than each one of our divine sparks. And as we begin through practice to tear down these walls, tear down the barriers, tear down the false, tear down everything we've come to believe, and to reach that place of what is true, actually, we wind up gaining all the power we could have ever wished we would have. And that's when finally we're not feeding the system and we're feeding ourselves, and we're
Okay,
feeding
so
then
just stop
the
there a
intent.
moment, because
Yeah.
that sounds like some good news. And I know that people listening to this are probably, you know, I don't know, might be feeling quite disturbed. So, in your book, you said that Plato's cave is essentially where we've been locked away for centuries from our natural power. Can you elaborate more on this natural power that we have?
It's hard to try to discuss because it's nothing it's not material, and generally the problem becomes is that when someone starts going to a spiritual tradition or any kind of thing that seems to be self-reflective or work on the self, any little bit of power that starts to be tacked onto gets turned into, then how can I manipulate reality? How can I make reality what I want it to be? How can I manifest what I want? How can I make it do what I want? So even though people start to access some of this true power within, they waste it by trying to basically change the props in the theater production. They don't like the show that's going on, so they're going to change the show to what they want, which they tend never to be able to do, but they keep trying and wasting their energy. This internal power is not something that's necessarily about working with this particular reality. It's about being able to, a first step, reflect. That's the best word to describe. Mr. Park used to talk about it in three stages. The first stage he called Korean, so Kwang, sun, and it was about building your inner light. So he said, like, first time he met me, all he told me is, "Oh, you darkness, you just filled with darkness. You need some light." So the whole work was about removing all of this inner darkness, which would be the pain of my life, right? The trauma, the suffering, so that a light could be found and grow. But then once you found the light, the next one was in Korean, it's myung, which is moon, the reflection. So then it start learning that the entire dream, the entire simulation, and everything in it is going to be pressing on us constantly, is going to be trying to get our attention, is going to try to get our focus, or it's going to try directly to manipulate us. That's, people don't like to hear that, how the simulation is manipulating us constantly. And so we learn how to reflect all of that, how to literally not try to harm anything, not try to cause anything. We just literally reflect it and make it neutralized. And once you've learned how to do that, now the inner power that's there can actually start grow. And from that growth, you can begin to have impact. And I like to tell people, not on changing the whole thing. Simulation's insane. And it's been built to be insane. It's perfect. I can't say that the simulation we were in is insane, but it's perfect. And generally, when someone at any level comes to see there's something wrong with the reality we're in, there's something wrong with this place, the natural tendency is to try to fix it. Of course, that's a human tendency. Someone's in trouble. How can I help them? So they're trying to fix everything. The problem is it can't be fixed because this is how it's been built. It's been built to be insane. But what you can do, I found, is, but if you turn that energy and that attention to yourself and a few people around you, a small community, now that energy can have tremendous impact, and it can have an unbelievable ability to raise people extremely high, and especially now extremely fast on the ladder of knowledge and understanding and truth seeking and at freedom. All of those things come from taking that energy and using it very, very wisely in a small area, you might say, in a small group. And everything within reality, like I talked about this when we were at the Better Way conference with you, is that well, reality is not real. Well, this is not this is a simulation. you can't give up things here and expect you're going to get an ultimate thing. You can't give up relative freedom and then expect one day you'll have ultimate freedom. You can't give up a relative truth. Someone could say, is this a white cup? And if I say yes, well, I know it's actually not true. It's not a cup and it's not a color at all. But relatively, yes, it's okay. It's a white cup. But if you give up relative truth, if you fight that, you'll never find ultimate truth. If you give up all of these, so it's important, not from the standpoint of I want to better my life here. I don't do these things within the reality so that my life is better. If my life improves, great, that's a bonus. I'm happy about that. If it doesn't, okay, but it's all about the ultimate totality, the ultimate intent, which is reaching home again. So, but if you give that up here, if you give up your authority to something else here in the dream world, when you hit the astral realm, you'll have no chance against the kind of games that those beings are going to play with you in the astral realm. So this is like, I tell people, the material world is not about getting a better material world for yourself or others. It's about practicing. It's preparing yourself in all of these key areas that when it comes time, usually after you die, but it can happen if you do it right, you can do it before you die, when you're going to have this opportunity to leave. If you actually get, and I'll say this and then I'll shut up and let you ask a question. It's because this is, again, these are all my opinions, right? These are all my opinions. Granted, I can back them up with tons of ancient texts and whatnot, but they're still my opinions. Because I believe the simulation is ending, there's a space between the next simulation starting, even if it's a microsecond of our time. There's a space between one simulation turning off and one turning on. In that space of time is going to be an unbelievable opportunity where the doorway will be open. The doorway to everything you've ever wanted will be opened at that time. And if someone has done their work, has been serious, has taken this work truly to the core of what it means, you'll have it's an opportunity that hasn't been here for hundreds, who knows, maybe even thousands of years. We actually, in the midst of all of this insanity and all of this craziness that's going to get worse, is this doorway. And I think part of the reason it's been made so crazy now, why they're actually trying to create such insanity, is they want make sure that people don't notice the open doorway. They don't want people to notice there's a giant door of leaving the cave open right now for those who want to take it. And eventually, though, they know if they get to the point, the door's going to shut. It was too late. So it's all of this is a giant distraction from the great opportunity that I think exists for anyone who wants to take it.
Well, through that doorway is the better way. That we're busy creating a way out of tyranny that may or may not.
No. Through that door is leaving. You're gone. You're literally out of here. You're. That's another thing. Is like I've read so much of or seen things. Exiting the matrix. What does that mean? What does exiting the matrix mean? It usually involves something about gaining more connection to nature, loving people more, fixing the government. I don't know. And it's like, that's the matrix. It's all the matrix. Exiting the matrix means literally exiting your true self, or not even self, because it's not self, the true thing of what you are, the true spark of total awareness leaves the simulation. You can think of it as the video game character actually is out of the video game.
Walking away from
they're actually gone. You're walking away from reality completely. And so it's a huge thing. And it's so pervasive that most people can't even contemplate what that means. And if it wasn't for my years of work in this regard, where I was testing all these realities, it would make no sense to me. It would be words on a page. Thankfully, because of what I'd done, I have a bit of an understanding of how I think this is going to be, but I'm still working on my own navigational principle. I'm still working on my own, the way the journey is going to have to go, and really going into these texts to get the clues, whether it be the Apocalypse of James or the Tibetan Book of the Dead or whatever, these little bits of clues that they've left us of how you navigate the final, more difficult parts of the journey, like actually dealing with the prep in the material world. This is the easy part. The next part begins to get much, much more challenging. But I guess that's why I feel compelled to share this stuff, is because I know there are others like me who have gone through, and usually it's if someone's had a great life, if someone is watching this right now and you've had a great life, mom and dad loved you, you had great opportunities to go to school, and you have a great career, you're going to think I'm nuts. You're going to think everything I say is insane. I guaranteed. But if someone has gone through really messy trauma, or if you've had a close family member go through serious trauma and you've had to start questioning, why does a world like this even exist? Then the stuff I'm saying starts to make sense to you and starts at least to get you thinking like, hey, I used to think like this 20 years ago and I was told not to anymore. Maybe it's not wrong to think like that. So part of what I've done now is with all that I do like this, whether it's talks or books or the things I do in my locals community or whatever, is just to make places where people have an opportunity to say such ideas were a part of the ancient world. This is how the Cathars thought. The Cathars, the group in southern France that was persecuted by the Church of Rome and actually basically all burnt and killed, they had only one, felt there was one goal of life, end the reincarnation cycle. That's it. All other goals are absolutely secondary, and secondary way down the list. The Gnostics were similar. Early stages of what we would now know as Buddhism and Taoism, they all have the same concept. Just end the reincarnation cycle completely. And so you're not strange to be thinking like that. You're not. It's not incorrect to think like that. Doesn't mean it's you that you should believe it 100%. It means that it's okay to explore these ideas and these concepts because it might possibly, if you look far enough, be the truth. And it's all about everyone has to find their own truth, their own way, their own understanding. I'm just providing, again, the way I've come to see it. And yeah, it's harsh, but like you say, I think the end result of this harshness is reaching ultimate freedom and
Mm.
ultimate truth and, in a sense, home. Sounds great to me.
It does feel like there's something slightly different. If I think about ancient teachings, wisdom, Lao Tzu and Taoism and so on, to me there seems to be more of an element of trust in the universe and um, than what I get from you. I'm just going to leave it with trust, a sort of trust in one's own it was self knowledge and development and whatever, but trust in the essence of being human that carries one through. If one can stick to those, the core of what it means to be human, then there's nothing to worry about. So it's sort of getting
Well,
back to
yes and
that.
no. I mean, that's
Mm.
part of the game. Now, part of the game is we have been built into the system as a particular character. So it makes sense to learn, well, what's the character I've meant to be? First, human. So what does it even mean to be human? There's a question that very few people even ask. Okay, I've been made to be a male human. I've made to be a male human that lives from a northern climate. And one of the things that makes life easier is not fighting against the original program, like the robot, not fighting the robot that's been built. The problem becomes is when you believe that the robot is actually real or what the robot does is important. This is where it becomes like Richard Rose was very clear. One of the few teachers that I've come to really respect over my time here is then, and he was very clear that the job isn't to stop being a robot. The job is to find out what are the small areas where you can override the robot and find the truth of what you are. And that's really what it is. So a lot of that stuff is being comfortable, like just be the human that you've been built to be. Don't, everyone's trying to be something else. I don't like me. So I want to be this over here. I want to be that over there, as opposed to if you just be what you are and simplify that for the way you've been built, you actually have a lot less problems. And when you have a lot less problems, then it means you have more time available. If you have more time and energy available, you now have a choice of where you want to put. Same thing as being healthy. You as a person in the medical field, it's very, very important. If a person is ill, then a lot of your time and energy is spent getting your body to not be ill. It's a lot of work to go from being sick to healthy. So if you can keep yourself at a healthy level possible, that means all that energy that would normally be going into trying to help yourself can go somewhere else. Unfortunately, people tend to take this spare energy and again, they throw it back in the dream, trying to get more things for themselves, more stuff, bigger cars, bigger boobs, more importance, more people liking me, whatever. So it just gets tossed out there and they wind up energetically empty again, as opposed to, okay, I've got this energy reserve now. Where do I want to put it? What do I really want to do? It's one of the I would say this is one of the best questions somebody could ask themselves for anything. Don't worry about exiting the cave and, leaving the Archons behind. I mean, just whatever simple, whatever it is you want out of reality, out of your life. Say, okay, you've got an X amount of energy available in your life, 0 to 100. Normally, you're spending 90 units every day on your life. What if you started figuring out how you could spend 70? You're going to have 20 extra units of energy available. What are you going to do with it? I mean, really ask this question. If all of a sudden you get this core of energy and core of time, what do you want to do with it? Where would you put it? Honestly, and it's okay because probably your answer would be, I don't know. That would be the honest answer. I don't know. If you're not going to, yeah, oh yeah, I'm going to put this, I'm going to get this big house, I'm going to get this, I'm going to, if you say, well, I'm not going to do that, I want something else, what do you want? So it literally becomes the most important question you can be at the starter point is knowing what you really want. And you probably don't. And that's okay. Like literally take 2 weeks and think about it, write it down, have some, because if you can ever find out what you really want, what you, at the deepest core level, this is what I want, guaranteed, if you follow that pathway, you will get it.
I certainly,
Whatever it is, you will get it or you'll get that answer, guaranteed.
I certainly agree with you that many people, many of us are so far removed from even knowing what we really want because we've been guided by the wrong things. We've been guided by money mostly, I think. You've got to get a good education, a so-called, a good job, prospects and all that, something to fall back on or whatever it is. There's always a reason not to follow not to even examine what it is you really want. It's, I think as young people, it's what your parents want or your teachers suggest or so it is really difficult for people to get back in touch with and then of course, once you're in the position where you've got the job and you've got the mortgage and all that fear of debt and you're really enslaved. And so it can be, I think so many people are living so far from who they really are. And I think fundamentally we are all creative. I think we're very creating things, be it, with our hands or our ideas or whatever. I think that's something that's part of being human. In my experience, I think people are just creating and connecting. Those two things seem to be really important to us all. What do you think in the simulation, what do you think the role is then of characters like Yuval Noah Harari calling us all hackable animals and saying, we must either be upgraded or discarded or whatever? Where do those people like that fit in?
Um,
And where do they get those
event,
crazy notions from?
yeah, when you begin to realize there's a hierarchy of knowledge, of course, coming from the fallen creator, Lucifer, right from the top, down through the various archonic levels. Um, once this material realm had gone through a few simulations, it seems like when you read the ancient texts that the archons decided it would be good because they used to always only never be here really. They were always from the other realms. So they decided to get what you might call direct representation in the material realms. And you might say that's what I don't like to call them the controllers of this realm because they're not really controlling like they think. I
Are
call
these
them
are they
influencers.
extraterrestrials? Is that what we're talking about here, archons? I've
But
heard
I
people
wouldn't.
say that they're coming back or
Yeah,
something. Is that even something that you have
it's
a
more.
view on?
They're more just the next level of the interface, you might say. They're how how AI they are, I don't know, but they're definitely very plugged into the system. And it's a type of hive mentality. So whatever's a level above them just gives the information down that the next level needs to know and needs to do, because part of why they do it is two reasons. One is the benefits that they get for being a part of the control system, right? They get tremendous benefits within the realm. As soon as you, in a sense, sell your soul to Satan, you are given a ton of material world gifts. And so they don't want to give up their material world gifts, their places of power and importance, of course. That's one part of it. The other is because they're not divine spark. So if the simulation ended tomorrow, everyone who is a divine spark, and not every human being you see is a divine spark. I don't even think there's many of us here, actually. But those of us that are, if the simulation ended, like powered off, we would automatically go home. There's nothing here that could keep us anymore. The simulation's gone. We would go home. And all of these archons, all of these beings are generated by the Matrix. They're like Mr. Smith in the Matrix movies. It's not just they're from the system, they are the system. If the simulation ends, they end. And they know that. And so I think they know that their number one perspective is keep the simulation running. They need to keep the entire game continuing. And that's really what they're doing. It's self-preservation. They know if the game ends, they end. And I actually get a bit of it's not empathy is the word, but it's a really different viewpoint of why they're doing what they're doing. And of course, they only know what they're doing to the point that in the hierarchy they've been told what to do. And
I do find myself feeling sorry for them too. Just to have this, it must really stem from a place of fear to have this need to control others in that way and cause
right.
suffering.
Right, but that's what the system does well, and the system wants more of it. And in fact, the new simulation will be even more of it. However bad you think this simulation is, the next one is going to be 10 times, 1,000 times worse. You definitely, if you have any interest of ending this thing, you want to do that now. I don't mean your life, because that's not going to help you, right?
No.
I get that a lot. I used to
Can
get a lot of emails like that.
Can I make a suggestion? What about
Sure.
there being two simulations? So, simulation dystopia and a simulation where everybody remembers who they are and gets back to that. And as you say, does everything they can to reduce suffering so that the experience here is better. Is that
So you want a
something that
happy
could be
prison.
conceived?
So you want a happy prison.
No, I don't think. Well, I mean, is it possible that if as you say, as above, so below, that we could make? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, if it's all if we're all in the cave, then
Right.
But
If
certainly
this is and that's why this is an important question. It's an absolutely important question. Like, okay, is it what I say potentially true? Is it really a prison? Is what people like Schopenhauer and Sayoban and Samuel Beckett and whoever the so-called pessimist philosophers, I don't consider myself a pessimist philosopher, but I would be labeled as one, all claim it's a type of prison. So if that is, and that should be a question for anybody curious, is it? How could you test it? How could you find that out for yourself? Because you don't want to take any of our words for it. We might be wrong. Remember, I've spent a lot of time with native medicine people for many years, and I had a lot of mystical experiences. I had a lot of wonderful, the most beautiful experiences you can imagine, actually. But in my death experience, I realized all of those are just as false as the painful memories. None of them are true, because the world that is the thing that's having first of all, the thing that's having the experience is false, and the world that's being experienced is false. So all that's being experienced is a false experience. That doesn't mean it should be ignored, and it doesn't mean I'd love to go into nature too. If I'm feeling tense or stressed or something, I can just go and sit by my lake, and I sit there for a couple of hours and I sit still, and all of a sudden I feel rejuvenated. And I mean, we need to take advantage of the reality we're in all the time. But I'm talking about when someone's got to a certain point, you realize there is actually nothing here, that everything is evil. I hate to say that, but even nature is evil. It's evil because it's false. It's evil because it's not true. It's evil because it's designed to steal energy. And so I actually have the greatest empathy possible for every tree, every cat, every bird, every person, every rock, every stapler, because I know it's all souls that are trapped in a false reality. And my empathy is actually overflowing for everything. And while I wish there was more I could do, I know it's limited. And my feeling is if I can find five, and I don't even mean people, I mean five plants, five animals, five whatevers who I think can hear this message and use that internal wisdom to not be a part of this anymore, I've done my job. I've done my job. So I've been exactly where you're saying, and I know how beautiful it can be. I still sometimes go and experience it because it's nice. But I also know, at least for me, there's a much bigger project going on, and we don't have time. We do time is about up here. I hate to say that, but I think time is about up. And 2023, we had a pretty even year. It was a pretty calm year. If you didn't, unless you lived in Gaza or a few places, it's been relatively calm. 2024 is not going to be that kind of calmness. It's going to be potentially wild. And we need, my suggestion is just that everybody needs to use their time very, very effectively for what's most important to them. And it shouldn't be what I say is important. It's whatever you say is important. That should be the number one focus going into 2024. Whatever's important, that's what you should be doing, and you shouldn't be waiting until next week to do it. You should do it now.
Thanks very much. Well, on that we do agree, because my message for the year is to work on what has been spoiled, and
Work on what has been what?
on what has been spoiled, recognizing
Spoiled.
spoiled, yeah, and yeah. So, and I think that's really internal work, because it all starts with us, we've been spoiled in many ways, and we continue to spoil our children and so on. And certainly, whatever structures we had thought were robust and had integrity are all spoiled too. There's another thing that I agree with you, Howdie, and that is a quote from your book, which is, you don't slay evil down by fighting it directly, because you become what you fight. You just don't play the game and play its game. And, I couldn't agree more with that. With what we're up against, it's certainly not a game to be played. We have to really, and in actual fact, with the work that I'm doing with the World Council of Health and A Better Way, we see, there's so much conflict in so many groups around what's happening at the moment. And in actual fact, would you like to just spend a minute speaking about conflict and the value in just stepping away from that and not playing that game?
Sure. Sure. I'm going to say this. You can cut this out if you want.
Okay.
But I'm going to say this in a particular way. So I've come to see that the system is really, really smart. So what it does is something happens, an event or an experience or something's going on. So the first thing they do is they control the narrative side, which we would classify as the media. So they will control that side, and they will get out the story that they want to present. What they also then do is they right away get in touch with their, what we now call conspiracy theory side, or the alternative side. And they put out the presentation on that side that they want. And it doesn't mean necessarily that the people giving it are part of the system. It just means it sounds good because, well, I know this side is wrong and this side makes more sense, so I'm going to run with that. What they've done is they've created back to the duality, two opposing sides that are conflicting each other, are fighting each other, causing the most important thing, which would be to ask, well, wait a minute, what if both sides are wrong? What would be the third question that would have to be asked? And because it's never being asked, the level of truth never gets found. So it's the conflict is built in. I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's take the JFK killing. Oh no, I better change that. JFK event. That's the best word I can describe for it. It was an event, first of all. So we have the mainstream media side that came out right away that said it was Lee Harvey Oswald killing Kennedy on the street. And okay, then the alternate side began to come out over the years. No, he was killed by the CIA. No, he was killed by this. No, he was killed by the mafia. No, he's killed by. So these two sides are just creating conflict and fighting each other. And we get to the, well, how do we know an assassination took place for sure? So you're missing the third question, which would be the initial question. Okay, let's find out the proof of, okay, did he really get shot or not? Then we can go. So it's like you've created the battle without creating the question at the base. If we're doing with what we're talking about in the world right now, okay, so one side is telling us we have this deadly virus and it's gonna kill everyone unless you do what we tell you to do. Then you've got another side that comes out and says, well, no, actually the virus is not too dangerous at all. If you just do this and this, you're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Well, when these sides are conflicting and fighting each other, we're missing the question at all. Is there a virus at all? How do we know? How would we know there is even one that exists? Because actually we have no proof of that it exists. So that, like, to me, that should be the number one question everyone should be asking. It's like, okay, if all these people are getting sick, how can we find out what they're getting sick from? But instead, it gets turned into a battle of what to do about something without saying we don't know what it is yet. You see what I mean? See how the whole game is being structured? And it's
Mm.
all when you begin to see that it's actually a structured process to keep people away from asking the question that they don't want people asking. And if you look for this, you'll find it in everything. It's ingenious.
Mm.
So now when something comes out in the news that's pretty wild, I say, okay, well, I know that's false. I'll see the conspiracy side of it. Well, I know that's false too. So what's the third? What's the third thing that's not being discussed? That could be where the truth is. And
Mm.
that's probably what you're facing in your world right now as things go on more and more, the sides, of course, need to keep conflicted as much as possible, uh, because that's what the system wants. They want this. So the best way to do that is if you're caught in it is to realize you're actually playing their game by being involved in the conflict. That's what they want. So the question will be, what don't they want? What is the thing they don't want me to be? I'm going to be that. I'm going to act and be that way
Mm.
because then you might actually create a place of some balance, at least inner balance, harmony, clarity that can then maybe start to rub off on others. And they might say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna let go of the fight too, and I'm going to ask deeper questions. And yeah,
So
so
Howdy,
that
I
that
know
would be
one thing that they don't want. They don't want comedy. So I was just wondering if you have a joke for us.
a joke. Unfortunately, no. I never. It's one of the weird things when you ask a comedian to have a joke, and usually they say no because we had pieces of material that used to fit together. Um, so no, but I agree. Finding something that is humorous. That's why you started one of your Better Way presentations with JP Sears and his Awaken with JP things. He's brilliant. He's actually brilliant in that he is able to bring out extremely important subjects in a sarcastical, humorous way that allows a large number of people to potentially take in the information in a safe way. Actually, I think it's brilliant. And
Well,
yeah, if that
next
could be
time I hope you'll come ready with a joke. I think we need it, especially after the serious nature of what you brought forward. So, I mean, I always bear in mind that people, and I'm not going to say throughout history, but people with challenging ideas are usually dismissed in the first instance, and it can take a while for very difficult, challenging, and fringe ideas to be heard. So I do, wish you all the best with your continuing work exploring this subject. with your book, Exiting the Cave, or the reincarnation trap, is it? I hope I'll put a link in the article so people can access your book. And I want to just thank everybody for watching, if they have managed to stay with us for the whole duration. Thanks for joining me on this quest to figure out what on earth is going on right here on Earth. And bye for now. And thank you, Howdie.
Thanks for having me.